Good evening and welcome to this meeting of Colchester Borough Council's Environment and Sustainability Panel. My name is Matthew Evans, Democratic Services Officer, and the first item of business tonight is the election of a chair for the forthcoming municipal year. Councillors, can I have a nomination, please?
Could I please nominate Councillor Mark Corey, following on from his chairing of the Task and Finish group? It would make sense.
Thanks, Councillor McCarthy. Is there a second for Councillor Corey?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Are there any other nominations? Not seeing any indications. We'll proceed to the vote then. If I'll call your name out in alphabetical order, if you could just indicate yes or no on the proposal, please. Councillor Chapman.
For.
Councillor Chillingworth. Connecting to audio. I'll come back to you. Councillor Corey.
For.
Councillor Dundas.
For.
Councillor Gocher.
For.
Councillor McCarthy.
For.
Councillor Scordis.
For.
Councillor Whitehead.
For.
Thank you very much. Councillor Corey, you're elected as the chair of this panel for the forthcoming municipal year, and I hand the meeting over to you. Oh, I beg your pardon, Councillor Chillingworth.
Yes,
sorry, I missed you out there. You were just
four.
You're for. Great, thanks very much. In that case, Councillor Corey, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you for starting it off, and thank you, councillors, for supporting that, so I can chair this panel for now and carry on the good work from the Task and Finish group that I thank most of the councillors here this evening who are on that last year, and welcome Peter to the meeting. Now you're finally connected. So we move on to item 2, which is appointment of a vice chair for the forthcoming municipal year. And as if we're continuing in the way that we have said that I can continue chairing after the Task and Finish group, which was successful, I propose that Peter Chillingworth, Councillor Peter Chillingworth, be vice chair of the group going forward as well. So that's my indication. Are there any other nominations? Could I have a seconder for my nomination, please?
I think
I can
Councillor
second.
Chapman indicated.
I did.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I couldn't see you all. So that's nominated and seconded with no other nominations. Therefore, can I pass to the vote, please, Matthew?
Yep, absolutely. Same as before, councillors, please. Councillor Chapman.
For.
Councillor Chillingworth.
For.
Councillor Corey.
For.
Councillor Dundas.
For.
Councillor Gocher.
For.
Councillor McCarthy.
For.
Councillor Scordis.
For.
And Councillor Whitehead.
For.
That's unanimous, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew, and congratulations, Peter.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll try not to miss any meetings in the next few months. Thank you. Right, we'll move on to welcome and announcements. So welcome to the members of the public that are watching this evening, and I'm sure we'll gain more audience as we continue to do good things on this agenda. An agenda I'm passionate about, and many of you on the committee have shown over the last year you are too. So welcome to you, councillors, and welcome to the officers as well, who we will go to shortly to introduce themselves. The meeting is being held remotely in line with the provisions of regulations introduced by the government to enable local government decision making to be held remotely. The meeting is being broadcast on the council's YouTube channel. The meeting will be available to view on the YouTube channel afterwards. Councillors and officers taking part in the meeting are requested to mute their microphones. Please activate the microphone when invited to speak and turn the microphone off when you have finished speaking. Visiting councillors and members of the public and officers not taking an active part in the meeting are requested to turn off their cameras until they're invited to speak. When speaking, speak clearly and slowly. Please indicate to speak using the raise hand function on the participants icon on the screen. Introduce ourselves is what we'll do next. So I'm now chairman of this panel, and I'll invite members to confirm basically who they are and their ward and that they're attending this evening. And Councillor Paul Dundas, if you could just indicate who you're substituting for. Thank you. So in order of alphabetical order, it's Councillor Chapman, Councillor Chillingworth, Councillor Davidson, Councillor Dundas instead, Councillor Gocher, Councillor McCarthy, Councillor Scordis and Councillor Whitehead. So in that order, Nigel, please.
Nigel Chapman, Councillor for Rural North Ward.
Councillor Peter Chillingworth for Rural North.
Councillor Paul Dundas, Stanway Ward, substituting for Councillor Robert Davidson.
Mark, over to you.
Councillor Mark Gocher, Castle Ward.
Councillor Sam McCarthy, Shrub End Ward.
Lee Scordis, Old Heath, Hive and Rowhedge.
Councillor Lorcan Whitehead, representing Newtown and Christchurch.
Thank you all, and I represent Wivenhoe Ward, which I did not say at the start. I'll invite officers to introduce themselves. I believe we have Rory Doyle, Rosa Tanfield, Ben Plummer, David Carter, I think this evening, I haven't seen him yet, but Emily Harrop and Steve Collis. Over to you, Rory.
Good evening, everybody. So I'm Rory Doyle, Assistant Director for Environment, member of the Senior Management Team supporting the panel this evening.
Rosa.
Hi, I'm Rosa Tanfield. I'm the Group Manager for Neighbourhood Services, and I'm presenting an agenda item today regarding greening policy and the reduction of glyphosate use this evening.
Thank you. Ben.
Yeah, hello, Ben Plummer, Climate Emergency Project Officer at the Council.
Thank you. David Carter, are you here?
Hello, I'm David Carter, Parks Contracts Volunteering Specialist.
Thank you, David. You're a bit quiet there, so next time, please shout. And then Emily.
Hello, I'm Emily Harrop. I'm a project officer in the Transport and Sustainability team.
Thank you. And finally, Steve.
I'm Stephen Collis. I'm one of the park specialist officers.
Thank you. Thank you, officers. In terms of the provisions of the Constitution, we'll look at a timing for breaks if necessary around 8 o'clock, but hopefully we'll be able to round up about that time. And can members please give notice to me as the chair if they need to move away from their screen for any period, and to sort of mute their microphone and their screen. Thank you. An introduction to the work of the panel. It's a new panel that has continued on from the Task and Finish group that we set up last year. The Environment and Sustainability panel explores methods of conservation of natural habitats and biodiversity through adapting existing practices or creating new ecologically diverse environments. The panel encourages renewable energy generation and carbon footprint reduction in both the public and private sectors by examining air, water quality, plastic waste reduction, renewable energy generation. The panel also monitors the progress and implementation of the Council's climate emergency action plan and regularly reports to Cabinet and full Council. And part of that we will look at in the terms of reference coming up shortly. So item 4, substitutions. Councillor Dundas is substituting for Councillor Davidson. Urgent items, item 5. Matthew, I've heard of none. Are there any?
No, there are no items urgently, Chair.
Thank you. Item 6, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest relevant to matters on the agenda tonight, councillors? I can't see any hands up indication electronically and none on my screen. Okay, thank you. We also have no have your say for this first meeting, but I'm sure we will get future interest, I hope, from the public. Moving on to item 8. So the first main item today is the introduction of the work panel, the work programme in terms of reference. So something I've done is just work with officers on the first draft that we had, which played into the Task and Finish group, and actually just to add in a bit more information there and a bit more of a challenge for us to take a wider role in the community to encourage, to engage and to collaborate with the community a bit more. So something I've worked on with Rory and Matthew, and I hope if Matthew you could share our screen to have a look at what I'm suggesting to councillors, please. Thank you. So in terms of the changes that I'm proposing to what was in the agenda already is just to improve item 3.3, just to get the words engage, because I want us to engage the public and the community, and collaborate, because I want to do that with the community and with partners across the community. And in the other bullet point, it does talk about below number 4, public and private as well, which is really important. In that, I'd also think that community and voluntary services can be included too. And item 5.5 is a new point to actually say what more can we do outside of the council and even outside of our borough. So if you would like to take a look at those, and I would happily take any comments on those terms of reference. What I've done is change number 3 and add in another bullet point there, number 5. So if we just take a moment to have a look at that, and I'll just check participants if anyone is ready to comment yet. I've got Councillor Chapman ready to comment, so I'll bring you in now, Nigel, please.
That's it. It's just a thought really under 3. I'm just wondering whether it would be helpful to say parish councils as well.
Let me just go back to that. Yes, I'm happy to put that in. Yes, that would work well. If others are happy to do so. Thank you, Nigel.
Thank you.
So Matthew, if you could capture that, I think we could insert it: strategic partners, external bodies, parish councils and local communities.
I think that makes sense. Good.
Is that acceptable, Nigel? Yeah.
Yeah, fine. Yeah.
Any other comments on that? Or I've got Peter indicating. So I go to Councillor Chillingworth, please.
I'm very keen to demonstrate what the council has done to the community from an early stage. I want them to understand we're trying to set an example and that they should follow suit. How you express this, I'm not quite sure. I don't think we're at the stage yet where we should be promoting it to a great degree, but I think we must quite quickly build up to a situation where we are promoting this to the community. And I would have liked to have seen at some stage us going public on what we're doing and how we hope that the rest of you can follow, sort of thing. Now, I'm not sure the wording in 3 allows for that, does it?
I would say in 4 it says encourage environmental stewardship, but I suppose I didn't want to repeat that. In 3 I was talking about engaging and collaborating, so engaging the public and then working with the public and other bodies, public bodies or communities, community organisations. I think you're right. I mean, we have been going out there. We have put out a very useful infographic to explain how far we've got so far on our climate emergency action plan. And I do get it, Peter. I don't know if there's any further wording you want to suggest.
Can I ask how that was done? Was it done through the press? Because I haven't seen it.
Yes, it was mainly through social media, I think. I'm trying to think if we had a press release or not on that.
That is the problem, because I'm not a social media person so much as a press person. And I hope through television eventually, when we appear as a council on Look East or something like that, I think a lot of people take notice and see it. I'm not sure the population as a whole follows social media to that extent, only as a recreational rather than a newsworthy thing. But I may be wrong. Perhaps I'm a dinosaur. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm more than happy for you to promote me getting in the press more, Peter. You can join me, but yeah, I think that I understand that. I'm just wondering if we can add any wording into 3 or 4. And item 5 as well does say about how we develop and promote a borough voice. So that does partly include it as well, but I understand what you're saying about how we communicate with the public. So engaging is part of it, but communicating with them too.
Yes, communicating or encouraging in 3 might help.
So we could put to engage, communicate and collaborate.
Encourage. No, I won't waste time on this, but you take my point.
I do. Could we put communicate in after engage? So to engage, communicate and collaborate.
Yes, okay.
Thank you. That's a step. But we get your point, Peter, and I think that's actually part of what we wanted to do. I did discuss with Rory and Rory Doyle, if you did want to jump in at any point. It is part of what we discussed. We wanted to engage with the public, collaborate with communities. So that is part of what we want to do. That's also about bringing people in, bringing in experts from the community, because I think that the point of what you're trying to say is we need to bring them with us and come on the journey to understand what evidence we're dealing with. And here's the simple solutions about how we can improve our borough for everybody and for the environment.
May I suggest, Chair, either adding at the beginning of 3 to undertake promotion, engage and collaborate with strategic partners, or alternatively, we could insert it within paragraph 6 towards the end in terms of promoting the Council's Climate Emergency Action Plan and its goal to be net carbon neutral. So they feel perhaps like the 2 places where we could emphasise promotion.
Yes, I'd be happy with either of those.
I prefer number 6, Rory, I think, thank you, because we've added to number 3 twice now already. It becomes a bit of a mouthful. So point 6, I think if we can talk about that promotion of the plan to the public, or engagement with the plan with our communities. Something we get the thrust of it, don't we? So is that something we can take away, Rory, Matthew and I, and just work on from Peter's main thrust of his comments there?
Agreed, Chair.
With something that you just suggested for item 6, Rory, thank you. Are there any other comments? I'll just check the participants. Rory, I've just had you. So any other comments from any other members? Are we happy to endorse this for now? And we'll just make a further change to point 6, just to talk about promotion and engagement with the public to bring them with us on this journey.
Yes.
Thank you, Peter. So I will go for a vote on this one, Matthew, just so we've got buy-in, please. So if we could just go around the room, thank you.
So as before, councillors, please. Councillor Chapman.
Agreed.
Councillor Chillingworth.
Agreed.
Councillor Corey.
Agreed.
Councillor Dundas.
Agreed.
Councillor Gocher.
Agreed.
And Councillor McCarthy.
Agreed.
Councillor Scordis.
Agreed.
And Councillor Whitehead.
Agreed.
Thank you. That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you for the support on that, and that will guide us for years to come now, hopefully, and be updated as we do our good work going ahead. So I need to just go from my document back to the agenda. So thank you for that. We can move on to item 9, which is the climate emergency 1 year on, and I'll invite Rory Doyle and other officers in support to speak to the panel to give us that update, please. Rory.
Thank you, Chair. So good evening, everybody. So I'll hand over to Ben very shortly, who will provide you with a snapshot of the activity that we've been delivering. And of course, that's set out in much more detail in the papers that you've received in preparation for our meeting this evening. So I think just to say, really, Ben's had a key role in facilitating and embedding our climate emergency into the council's business and our everyday activity. And his role is really important in terms of working across teams and services within the organisation. And I think it's just worth noting that actually Ben will be joined very shortly by a new role at the council. So we have a climate emergency manager joining us later on in September. That manager will be very much driving this agenda further forward, ably assisted by Ben and colleagues and the other officers that are joining us this evening. As I say, the information that you've had is very much a snapshot of what we've been delivering in the last 12 months. We've got the forward plan on the agenda later on, and I know the panel will be very keen, no doubt, to agree the areas that they want to have a kind of deeper dive into and that we can look at in more detail at future meetings. I just thought before handing over to Ben, it would be useful to provide some context really to the journey that we've been on with our climate emergency action plan, and in particular with regard to kind of scale and pace, because I think it's something that quite rightly we're challenged on. So this kind of slide really emphasizes that. So we made our climate emergency declaration back in July last year. We agreed our climate emergency action plan in January. I think we always said at the time it was very much a first step. It was a first draft, and recognizing, well, look how much has changed even since January. The world has changed significantly. So it's almost a good job, really, that we recognized that it was a first tentative step and that we would need to continually review, continually amend, and continually add detail. I think rightly as well, we were challenged at the time around the need to provide more detail, the need to provide some specifics on funding, on who's going to be delivering, on when the time frame will be, how will we know whether we're successful. And I think, again, I hope with this slide, it begins to just emphasize to you the processes we're going to in these early stages around the initial emergency response. So we're getting on with stuff that we know is the right thing to do in terms of some of our key projects. And you'll hear later from Ben a summary of the work that we're doing. We're undertaking a lot of work in terms of establishing our baselines, particularly with regard to our carbon footprint. You've already heard how we're identifying the resources we need to push forward this agenda. Very much part of our initial response, moving towards the delivery, moving towards being really clear on the specific objectives, the areas that will require investment, additional resources, and get to a place where we can clearly be able to measure our success and see whether we're on track. So like I say, I just thought it'd be useful illustration just to provide to members of the panel the journey, and that it's very much a 10-year journey and that we're at the initial stages. So I think it was always the view that we'd bring back updates on the climate action plan, and I think it will be our intention to do that through this panel in terms of agreeing what amendments might need to be made. So I'll pass over to Ben, if that's okay. I think Ben might have a few slides as well, just to kind of go over and summarise the key areas of activity, and we'll happily take any questions.
Okay, I'm just going to share some slides now. Hopefully this is going to work. So yeah, this is for item 9, and as Rory said before, the council had lots of. This is basically just a report on sort of key updates on projects that have a strong link to environmental sustainability. And it's sort of like a 1 year on report. This report was sort of written in sort of July time when this infographic was produced. So Councillor Chillingworth, there's the infographic for you to see on the screen there. Yeah, so it's been just over 1 year on since the Council's Climate Emergency Declaration. And yeah, the infographic was produced to summarise some key highlights that the Council has achieved along this journey. And to pick out just a few on here, one of the sort of significant highlights, I think, was late last year when the Friends of the Earth recognised the council and sort of Colchester Borough as a whole as being the joint top climate-friendly area in the east of England. So sort of showing that we're going in the right direction in terms of environmental sustainability improvements. In January 2020, through reporting from the Carbon Trust, the council achieved its target set to reduce its carbon emissions by 40% relative to 2008 levels. It shows the real progress that's been made so far, and obviously we've got to progress further to get to the carbon neutral objective. And some of the other projects that are on this little road or pathway are going to be mentioned in the upcoming slides. And this sort of goes in conjunction with the report that's being produced. So the first one I'm going to cover is the Northern Gateway Heat Network project. So this was launched quite a long time ago now, getting funding. A really innovative project to access low carbon heat from the ground to power the new Northern Gateway development, or at least part of the new Northern Gateway development. So the low carbon heat will be accessed using ground source heat pumps and boreholes that have been drilled into the ground, and that was conducted in July of this year. And further work will be being done towards the end of 2020 and into 2021 to build the Central Energy Centre and the connecting infrastructure to link all of this work up to then power the homes, the small medical facility and commercial space that this will contribute to. And the team in Amphora Energy, who've also been leading on this, have been conducting a feasibility study on the possibility of a microgrid to connect the low carbon heat being generated in the ground to further buildings on the Northern Gateway development complex. And I think that is due to be completed in September or October of this year. The next I've got on here is to planning and climate change. I think in the task and finish group in the autumn, the role of planning was identified as being really important in tackling the climate emergency. There's lots of different measures that can be taken. So you've got things to do with the actual houses that are being built, making sure we build to the highest sort of energy efficiency standards. The way that developments are set out, where they're located, and sort of how parking and that sort of thing is part of those developments can be used to encourage more sustainable forms of travel, walking and cycling, using public transport where possible as well, rather than private car usage. And also protecting of biodiversity, creating green space around housing developments and incorporating other sort of green elements into the design of the development. And that's just some of the ways that planning can be involved, really. And some actions that planning has been involved with in terms of improving environmental sustainability of developments is with the new Northern Gateway Sports Park development, there will be an installation of EV charge points as part of that, and I think that's the first time that will have been used. And for several new housing developments in the future, further EV charge points will be part of that. Also, within various planning applications that are going forward for new housing developments, there's been work to try and introduce more car club spaces into these developments to promote shared car usage and reduce the amount of private car usage to reduce congestion around the borough. The planning team has also created, or is in the process of creating, a climate emergency checklist, which will be given to developers, basically a set of recommendations that can be incorporated into developments to make them more environmentally sustainable. Things such as increasing sort of sites for renewable energy around the development, sustainable urban drainage systems, and that sort of thing. And also the developing the Colchester orbital can be linked into this as well. The Colchester orbital is a 14 to 15 mile walking cycling route around the borough, and the planning team have been working to make sure that the maps for that are all set up, how that links to developments, and also how this can be greened in the future to make these routes visually attractive and beneficial to biodiversity. The next project I've got here is the Clean Air for Colchester project. So this got funding from DEFRA last year, and there's two main aims. The first aim is to reduce idling when vehicles are stationary. So this is getting vehicles to switch their engines off when they're waiting at traffic lights or stationary, sort of anywhere really if they're being there for like a long time. So for example, outside schools and people waiting for their kids to be picked up, and try and encourage that positive behaviour to improve air quality. And the other one is also generally about encouraging more walking and cycling around the borough to reduce congestion and reduce consequential air pollution. So a survey was conducted at the end of last year, going into the start of this year, to understand residents' sort of knowledge of air quality in general and also around Colchester, and to investigate what sort of levers could be used to try and change their behaviours. So one of the key ones that was identified was that many residents said some reminders on the side of the road would encourage them and remind them to turn off their engines while they were waiting. I think idling amongst a lot of people was quite a subconscious behaviour, and they may be not aware of the impacts it can have on air quality. So a planning application has been put out for some signage that will be going around Brook Street and Eastgates area, which was within the air quality management areas of Colchester, where air pollution has been noted as being fairly high and above levels that it should be. So hopefully that will be accepted. It might be accepted already, I'm not too sure. And then that will be going in hopefully in October. And alongside that, there will be quite a big comms and marketing advertising campaign to show the project, advertise the project, and try and change behaviours around sort of this idling element in particular. That's what we're starting with. A number of volunteers or marshals have also been recruited to help deliver that message in person to residents around the borough. The next one we've got is the e-cargo bike project. This is quite innovative, exciting actually project that we got funding for in May this year from the Energy Saving Trust to purchase 25 electric cargo bikes and 5 electric trailers. So these are essentially the same as a normal bike, except they have a electric battery on and room for storage of storage of sort of goods or anything that can be carried essentially. And the idea is for these to be swapped in for vans and cars that normally have been used for this sort of thing to carry goods and services, and it's a swap out for a more environmentally friendly alternative. Emission-free electric cargo bikes, very, very good. This is a project that's both council and sort of links in with local businesses as well. 10 local businesses have been provided or will be provided when the bikes arrive with their electric cargo bike for any sort of delivery services or basically their own operations, which will help to reduce their emissions, personally, emissions around the borough. And also there will be some electric cargo bikes for use in the council's fleet as well. The parks team, Ipswich Museums and the zones have got a bike to conduct their operations. There will also be 6 e-cargo bikes out for loan for local businesses to try out, acknowledging that it's quite a new thing, an electric cargo bike, and there might be a bit of uncertainty about what it can be used for, its capabilities. So that gives them a good chance just to try it without any of the sort of commitment there. And this project is due to launch in about October time when all the bikes are in. So next few slides are just going to show you some of the bikes, and I'm going to hand over to Emily Harrop briefly just to go through that because she's got the knowledge of the bikes and has ridden some of them.
Thanks, Ben. The project's progressing rapidly now, so I thought it'd be useful to share with you what we're actually going to be receiving and what we're soon going to be seeing around our streets in Colchester. So 12 of the e-cargo bikes are already here. We've also got the 5 electric trailers, as shown in the photo. 4 of them have already been given out to some of our project champions. So if you could give us the next slide, please, Ben. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to get the rest of our e-cargo bikes, 18 remaining. And this just shows you the different types of bikes that are going to arrive. And all of these have been chosen by the individual champions to best meet their business needs. So some of the larger ones are going to be used by the likes of the hospital and the Repair, Reuse, Recycle, CIC organisation. Another one, one of the larger ones is going down to Wivenhoe Town Council. The council are going to use some of the electric trailers. They're going to be used by the parks teams and the zones teams. And then the 2 bikes sort of on the bottom right, the red one and the grey one, They're going to be used by zones teams. The one that's in red is we'll have one of those at Rowan House for any staff member to use. That's only slightly bigger than a normal bike, but has got the carrying load on the front. So I'm hoping that lots of staff will want to use that for their business travel. A key requirement of the grant is that anyone that rides one of our cargo bikes has to be trained to bikeability level 3. So over the summer, Essex County Council have been offering it for free, and at the moment are offering it for only £10. So at the moment, I'm spending a lot of time encouraging local businesses, staff, councillors to take up the bikeability training, because this will enable people to then use the bikes. And obviously, we want them to be out, very visible, and to encourage interest and discussion, so that hopefully some other businesses will take advantage of our offer of the short-term loan scheme. Thanks, Ben. Can I have the next slide? Thank you. So that's just a list of our 10 champions who are all receiving an e-cargo bike. The ones in yellow are the ones that have already received theirs. We've got 5 coming next week, 10 coming the week after, and then the remaining the week after that. So we're hoping to have everything up and ready to launch mid to end of October. Next slide, please. So in terms of where we are at the moment, we're ready to hand over to the champions once the bikes get here. And we're also developing a brand for the bikes so we can brand them up. And we then need to work on how we're going to operate the pool for short-term lets and plan our launch event. And there's just a quick quote there. Obviously, some of our champions have already been using their bikes and they've been getting some very positive reactions from the community. And there's just a quote there from the Colchester Bike Kitchen. They've been going around on their bright orange bullets and receiving a lot of attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily, for that. The next one is on council culture. So this is one of the sort of projects or work streams I've been most involved in since my start at the council. One of the sort of key tasks within my role at the council is to embed environmental sustainability in the way that staff work and the way that work processes at the council also work. So one of the key things I've done is develop an environmental impact checklist. This is now being put into the PID, or project initiation document. So when any new council project is developed, and they have to fill out this PID document, and they will then have to complete this environmental impact checklist to assess the environmental impacts of the project going forward, and identify ways that they are mitigating any environmental impacts of the project as well. And it isn't just to sort of highlight to people watching, it is a qualitative tool. It's not actually measuring the environmental impacts. I think at this stage, it's about getting staff to understand the sorts of environmental impacts that their project might have. And there's a strong part of the use of the tool will be me seeing staff responses to the checklist and being able to follow this up with staff to question them potentially on the environmental impacts of their project and recommending how they can reduce the environmental impacts further if I think the project could have a more sustainable design. And that's the main one I've been working on. And then there's a lot of, I think I'm engaging with a lot of different council teams, basically just to introduce myself, because my role is very collaborative, as I said, in terms of working with staff to increase their sort of environmental sustainability and knowledge. And at this stage, a lot of the work has been asking staff if they've got any projects that they're looking going forward. Is there any research that they would like me to do to support them in developing more sustainable projects by the time they get to the checklist stage? So a couple of things that I'll be as next steps essentially for my work is, one of the key ones for me is sustainable procurement. In the carbon trust analysis, which we'll be going on to in a couple of slides time, one of the key sort of indirect emission sources from the council is to do with the products and services that it buys, contracts it has out for various services that it delivers. And within that, I think it was identified as a key emission hotspot. We didn't know a lot about the sort of environmental performance of the contractors that we're using and the companies that we're using to purchase goods and services. So that will be a key thing to develop in the future, to sort of lead by example, work with greener contractors and encourage them to further reduce their environmental impacts as well. And another one I've got here is to do with the induction process, ensuring new staff are aware of the council's climate emergency declaration and the action plan when they start at the council, showing how important it is within the council's culture and setting out some expected staff behaviours for them as well. And we've got the Woodland project. So I know probably a lot of you know about this one already. Just last year, the council created the Woodland project. So the target of planting 200,000 trees by 2024, and a successful first year of planting last year. So between November and March, 4,486 trees were planted, involving members of the community, councillors and officers. And I think everyone who took part found it a very good experience. Also, the Trees for Years giveaway, which should be going on annually. Highest amount of trees and shrubs given out, 10,000 trees this year in February. So that was another successful event. And the second year of planting is due to begin starting in November, with 11,200 trees to be planted. And this year there's a key focus for the project to ensure that increasing tree cover doesn't go at the expense of protecting biodiversity. These are very, have to go sit in line with each other. And that'll be something that actually Rosa will probably touch on a little bit in her Greening Colchester report, because that's sort of a key thing now about the Woodland project, promoting and protecting biodiversity whilst also increasing tree cover. The Carbon Trust report, so I touched on this just now. So in the autumn and winter of last year, the Carbon Trust conducted a basic carbon footprint analysis for the council, and also helped to provide some ideas for the climate emergency action plan. And on the back of that, the council commissioned the Carbon Trust to do some further work to conduct two pieces of analysis primarily. So these are called pathway modelling. So pathway modelling is essentially extrapolating the council's emissions to 2030 based on council level trends and policies, as well as national policies and trends. So things like rate of the decarbonisation of the grid will affect the council's emissions through the electricity it consumes. And interviews with key officers within the councils who are responsible for emission hotspots or high levels of emissions, such as officers from Leisure World, the Fleet, were involved to inform that project, and a bit of analysis. And the second bit of analysis was on understanding the council's scope 3 or indirect emissions. So as I touched on in a couple of slides before, there's things like the council's procured goods and services, leased buildings that the council owns but leases out to third parties that operate within them, and also the emissions from the council's wholly owned companies such as Amphora and Colchester Borough Homes. So a couple of key findings from this report were, by 2030, the Carbon Trust estimates that the council's emissions are set to reduce to a total of 2,780 tonnes of CO2. And this was primarily looking at sort of large step change projects. So there will be other projects that can be done and will be identified along our journey between now and 2030 that will further reduce those emissions before we have to resort to sort of the last resort of using offsetting strategies to bring that down to carbon neutral. And the indirect emissions analysis, it really did give us an insight, because we hadn't done this type of analysis before. We had no idea of the emissions from some of these areas, and it was quite sizable, as some of you can see from the report if you've looked at that the Carbon Trust produced. And these were largely from Colchester Borough Homes and the housing stock, and also emissions associated with procured goods and services. And these are just a couple of the recommendations from the report, and maybe we might go into talk about the report later in the meeting and some of the recommendations. But as the report looked at some of the key step change projects within the council, and we sort of gave some basic details for these, the key recommendation was conducting some feasibility studies for how some of these works are going to be done. So electrification of the fleet being a key one, retrofit of the sheltered housing stock, which is in the carbon neutral target, is another one. And also improving data collection for indirect emissions where possible. So we're acknowledging the difficulty with that because the emissions are with another party and not with the council, so it's asking them for information. But the hope is that we can get further information on that. And I think the last one slide is on the COVID-19 recovery programme. I won't bore you with this too much because I'm sure you've had quite a lot of it of late. But a key strand within the council's recovery programme is that environment and sustainability is threaded right through it, and within each of the actions, if the environment and sustainability impacts can be incorporated, it will be. And just a few of the ways this is being done sort of early on. The key reason why we're all here is sort of being able to enable officers and partner organisations to work from home does bring that environmental impact of not having to travel into the town hall or wherever the officers would have been based. Delivering community hub services online and on the phone, that was a really key thing that was done quite quickly, because these were services that were previously delivered through the library and had to adapt very quickly during the COVID-19 pandemic to be done elsewhere. And these have had environmental benefits, and there's currently a consultation out with the public to understand how maybe some of these methods could be used more to deal with increased demand, and it might even suit some residents more as well, so they don't have to travel in. And the last one I've got on here anyway is working with Essex County Council to facilitate the safer, greener, healthier infrastructure changes that have been happening around the town centre to try and encourage walking and cycling. The changes that have been in since sort of June and July, there is further work that will be done to make cycling and walking easier. I think some of the changes at the moment are very much just the first steps, and there'll be more changes coming in to make it even better for walkers and cyclists. So I think that's it. Yeah, so I'll stop sharing and hand back over to Councillor Court.
Thank you, Ben. That's a lot achieved in your year at the council, or just under a year. So thank you for that. That's really helpful, and that gives us a lot to reflect on. And we can definitely see what we could focus on going forward. So I'll just see councillors. I know a lot about this, obviously leading the council and taking a very keen interest in pushing this as one of our key priorities, and it is in the strategic plan as our top priority. So I'm very aware of these projects, but I'm more than happy for you to ask questions of officers about the projects to find out more, or to see where we can adapt, improve and evolve going forward. So I'll welcome any comments. Councillor Scordis first, please. Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay? Excellent. No, that was really good, Ben. Really interesting, really good to see the amount of work that's gone on and what the panel's been up to. So there's a lot there for us as councillors to say what's happened, and I've already used the infographic, so that's really good. Just a few points. So I noticed the point about we're going to look to get more people to cycle and walk, which we definitely need. I'm just wondering how we're going to achieve that, because I've asked Essex similar things and they haven't really got the answers, but they're doing quite a lot on social media. But the problem is people are probably in their car by then, so sometimes a bit too late, but that is a priority for Colchester. Also on the crossings, where you're going to have the no idling signs. So East Street, you've mentioned in the report, which obviously we know is you can be waiting there for a good 10 minutes if you get it at a bad time. Just a thought that somewhere like Hive Station, you can be waiting there for a while and you have buses that never turn off the idle. And East Hill in general, I've had a lot of reports of the coaches that drop off there. They never turn off their engine. So I don't know whether we could possibly do some reinforcement, and Essex are looking at some drop-off points in that area for people as they're shutting off the high street. So wondering if that is possible. Also the working from home, which is really good to see, and I imagine a lot more people want to take that up. Do we know how that is looking as we move forward? Are there staff that want to work from home permanently, for example, or just come in once a week when we get back to normal? Or is it going to be slightly more complex that people may be coming in at odd different days? I will finish there, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Scourley. So I will help with a couple of those and then go to Ben. It's useful to have you as a county member for the town centre. That involves a lot of the hotspot air quality areas. So I do completely agree with you on the signage, for example. I want to support Ben and Emily and other officers who are linked with the air quality project to get as many signs around as possible. Whether the ones we need permission for are clearly fundamental sort of solid signs, whether we can have temporary ones as well. In terms of county and talking about walking and cycling, I do understand your frustration. We do have meetings regularly now called five-a-side meetings, where we have myself, Councillor Martin Goss with his transport environment hat on, Councillor King and Councillor Young, who meet with Councillor Bentley of the County Council and Councillor Robert Mitchell and officers who support us. And we are pushing forward as much as we can on the cycling there. And Emily, I'm sure will add more on that in terms of the Colchester transport strategy that is being developed in its draft stage at the moment with the County Council. So we're working with them to produce as much sustainable transport out of that as possible. And you would have seen as well with the Safer, Greener, Healthier project, we have involved the cycling community and the cycling charter campaign, the Colchester campaign for cycling. Stuart has been very helpful with that. So as much as possible, I understand we need to work with county to do more. In terms of staff, it may be one Ben can answer as well, but we are encouraging staff to work as flexibly as possible. And it's when people struggle to work at home due to childcare or due to the effects on mental health that they come in, and to enable them to have collaboration in Rowan House in a safe, COVID-safe way. So we are enabling that as much as possible, but I think your point may be about, is it ad hoc, or can we look at sort of forward change in terms of patterns of people's behaviour? And the e-cargo bikes is one example of that, and I'm going to be trained up on the bikes to try and do some of my work between Rowan House and the Town Hall when things get back to normal. So hopefully that's given you some help, but I'll obviously go to officers to give more detail. So Ben, perhaps Emily and Rory too. So over to you, Ben.
Yeah, I think you've covered quite a lot of what I might have said as well in response to that. I guess in regards to the air quality and the signage, there will be an update, well, according to the work programme, which we'll discuss soon, there's an update due to come to the next meeting. So hopefully there'll be some officers that are working on that project who will be able to give a little bit more detail than I can. But as far as I understand it, in areas which have currently not been identified to have signage yet, there will still be marshals going around the town centre, or volunteers going around the town centre, identifying people who might be idling and trying to change that behaviour. So that's a way to sort of increase the spread beyond where the direct signs are. But I think it's a good idea to try and get more signs out if it turns out to be quite a successful way to reduce air pollution. We can see that, we can measure that. In regards to the walking and cycling, I think once some of the more concrete kind of like infrastructure is in, I think once people can see infrastructure and it looks safer, I think there will be more shift from the public to walk and cycle. I think another sort of key thing, as you also mentioned, is the bikeability training. I would consider myself to be a fairly confident cyclist anyway, but I did the bikeability level 3 training, so I'd be able to ride one of the e-cargo bikes, and that was really helpful for me in increasing my confidence on the road. And I'd encourage anyone else to take that up as well if they want to, gain confidence with walking and cycling as well. And working from home, I don't know anything about concrete sort of how we're going to go forward with it, but I know that a number of officers have expressed a interest and have enjoyed definitely parts of working from home, but there will be a need to come into the office to have that natural collaboration with officers at times for sure. So that's my input on that.
Thank you. Rory?
Yeah, so just to add really to that point, I think Councillor Corrie covered very well our plans in terms of working from home, and Ben's touched on it there. A principal driver initially was around making sure our staff are safe, and have a safe and secure environment to work in. We recognise and we're taking into consideration everyone's own particular circumstances and where they need to work from a council facility, that we're enabling that. I think, as Ben touched on in his slides, COVID and our recovery from COVID, we're applying a sustainability lens to all of the work that's going on there. And that includes how we use all of our assets going forward. So it's absolutely, Councillor Scored, it's at the forefront of our minds when we're making decisions about our workplaces, our assets, how staff work, our processes, what are the environmental and sustainability implications of that. So it's a key driver. So there are benefits to be had from it, clearly. We know that it's activated a lot of people. People are working differently. They might not have done that before. So we're looking at it from both the positives, but recognising equally that some people will continue to need support. And just a really quick one in terms of walking and cycling, it's just to also note that we're part of a very big piece of work around physical activity generally. So Colchester is one of 12 areas in the UK that received funding from Sport England to increase levels of physical activity, particularly among vulnerable members of the community. Clearly, active travel, walking and cycling are a key part of that. And I know that the local delivery pilot particularly have been looking at the work going on with Safer, Greener, Healthier and the kind of infrastructure changes we can put in place. That will continue to be the case, and I know we've benefited from funding from Sport England to support some work in that area already.
Thank you. Lee, I saw you on mute. I don't know if there's anything more you wanted to add, but just before, I just wondered if sorry?
Although there was a slight one, but did you want to continue? Or
I was just going to see if Emily wanted to add anything else, but if not, I'll come straight back to you.
Yes, I was trying to find the hands up sign, but I couldn't find it. There was just a couple of things. Just obviously, we're hoping that better infrastructure is going to come through the tranche to work with Essex County Council if they get the funding, and potentially through the town deal, etc. Another, but a really important part, is the behaviour change aspects. We can provide infrastructure, but that doesn't mean people are going to use it. So in terms of a few things that are happening as part of the DEFRA funded project that's covering the no idling, we're also working with the schools in the air quality management area, and we're working with Essex County Council on looking at a sort of bikeability plus enhanced bikeability. So we're hoping that that will give us more insight into whether people are actually, or children are cycling more once they've done their bikeability, and what else do we need to do to support them to do that. So that's one part of the project. We're also going to be working with the resident area, specifically looking at encouraging them to use existing infrastructure to cycle into the town centre. So that's two sort of behaviour change elements we're looking at. But we're also looking for other funding streams, for example, the LDP, and there's another opportunity with DEFRA coming up to see if we can, again, bid for money that could help us focus on the behaviour change aspects to encourage cycling. And just on the locations, the locations that we've chosen are just for a trial. If we're successful with the trial, we'd definitely be looking to roll it out on a wider basis across Colchester and potentially beyond Colchester. Buses were also mentioned. They're definitely one of our target audiences once we launch the No Idling campaign. So they will be a particular focus for the campaign. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Just a short point back for you, Lee, if you can, and I'll go to the other waiting councillors. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. It was just one that came into my head around the signage. Whether we've got Colchester Civic Society on board or consulted them. I just don't want it blowing back on us. There'll be people who complain anyway, but it'd be good just to have them on board and they're aware of our objectives on this, which is to benefit Colchester.
Thank you, Lee. I think that's probably noted. We will go through the processes of consulting, but I think it's a key point, obviously, with our heritage aspects, that we're not damaging anything or blocking any views with the new sign. So hopefully, unless officers want to jump in, I think it's quite a common sense point that I hope that just reminds you of that good point. Thank you. I'll move on. I have Councillor Dundas, Councillor Chinningworth, Councillor Gocher, and Councillor Whitehead. And then Councillor McCarthy as well. So you all want to have a go. So over to you, Councillor Dundas.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much for the report. Lots in it. You'll be pleased to know I'm not going to comment on all of it. But what I will just say, it's really good to hear I detected a lot of real enthusiasm from the officers concerned about this, about their report and about their tasks. And that's really good to hear and detect. I think the only thing I was going to comment on, a couple of things, was planning and things like car charging points and that. I think, and I've spoken about this before, we've all been frustrated as councillors when we've been to planning hearings in the past and we're trying to get developers to put such things in. Obviously, we have got an opportunity coming up. We're putting in a consultation on the planning white paper, which is out at the moment, and notwithstanding any other good or bad points about it, I think we should be emphasising our difficulties we've had in the past in encouraging developers to put features in. So it may be that perhaps this committee might like to give some input to the local planning committee who is developing it. I think I'm not quite sure the best mechanics for doing that, but it might be something we want to think about. I think to a certain extent it will over long term be a problem which will solve itself, because I think in a few years time more and more purchasers of houses, particularly new houses, will be demanding these things. In other words, if you haven't got electric car charging points and that, people will not buy the house. So I think you'll find that developers will have to put them in, but at the moment they're not in sufficient numbers. On the idling, I would certainly agree with Councillor Scorless. Actually, I'm constantly amazed how people will sit for 10 minutes with their engine running. I can understand it possibly on a very hot day when they want the aircon or something on, but they'll do it on a day when it'd be quite pleasant, frankly, to put the window down and sit there in silence for 10 minutes. I think I'm right in saying, I mean, a lot of cars have got start-stop at the moment, which helps, but people can turn them off. I think I'm right in saying that the rules are changing, that in future you won't be able to turn it off on start-stop cars. So they'll stop whether you want them to or not. And obviously, as we have more and more hybrid cars, that they turn their engine off anyway. So again, it's in the long term it will solve itself, but in the short term, I think the sign's a really good idea and try and make it socially unacceptable to sit there with your engine running. On the home working, we've spoken about council employees. I think on the councillor side, obviously we're a little bit dependent on what rules the government may come up with or not after May. The current rules only run till May 21, I think, for online meetings. But I would certainly like to see something which reduces the endless shuttling backwards and forwards of councillors to the town hall and Rowan House. I appreciate we will go back to physical meetings and there'll be an element of that, but I think anything we can do to reduce that a bit as councillors is a positive, and it's certainly something I would back. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dundas. I think the point about the local plan and the white paper, the planning white paper, is a very important one. I'm happy to take that away to the portfolio holder as well. But I think, Rory, if we can note that to feed into the local plan committee, who have already had quite a bit of say on it, but particularly on electric charging points and sustainability and developers not using the viability against us on those kind of matters. Thank you. Are there any other points to pick up from Councillor Dundas, officers, or most of them were quite supportive, I think? Okay, I'll move on to Councillor Chillingworth, please. Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to congratulate and thank Rory, Ben, for the work they've been doing in this last year. I think it's amazing the progress the council's made in this area, particularly with the 6 months we last had with all the other problems. Well done. On that point, working from home, yes, but going beyond council officers, I think there's going to be a real trend of more people not going to the office in London, for instance. And I think we should have a planning policy which encourages mini office clusters where people can leave home, go to a desk and communicate without having an elaborate office. There's also the opportunity for them to do a little socializing with people in a similar boat, because one of the problems of home working is, apart from the domestic problems, you don't get away from home. And part of the culture of working is the comradeship, the social part of office work, which can be a drawback if you're completely working from home. So a policy in our local plan to encourage these in villages, farm buildings, and in the town, of course, where people can hire a desk on a weekly or monthly or longer term basis. I don't know if that's something for this group to put forward, or shall I just write to Karen Syret on the local plan? But I think it's something we should consider. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I'll pick up on that one quickly. It's something we have discussed as a cabinet. We're looking at how we can use our resources and buildings or potential funding. One of them was going to be the Queen Street old bus depot there, to turn that into a sort of hub for working, because we do think there's going to be that in-between usage as you describe, but also to have it more localized in smaller communities, farm buildings. That's I'm sure, as you say, they could be turned into real hubs of activity that aren't just agricultural. So I think that's something to pick up, and it does link to Councillor Dundas's point because it's local plan related again. So I wonder if we can take a recommendation. This is not a report upon which we're meant to sort of put forward recommendations, but it's something on the forward plan when we're looking at our work agenda. Officers, we could add that's something because as part of our terms of reference, it is about that stewardship. So we could feed that into Councillor Young as portfolio holder for the local plan. As a suggestion that we understand from what I've said as leader that we are looking at some aspects, but I think there's a wider part that Peter picked up on there. So I see nodding heads. We'll take that away and put that to portfolio holder, I think, from this committee as a slightly informal recommendation. Is that okay, Peter? Are you happy with that?
Yes, very happy. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gocher, please, Mark.
Thank you. There's some excellent stuff in the report, and I'd very much like to thank Ben and the team for putting it together. There's some great stuff in there. First of all, on the issue of idling, I think the signs are an excellent idea. It's a first step towards changing behaviour. It's great to see that happening. I'm very interested in these marshals. I'm just wondering if you could say a bit more about those. I mean, I think the word volunteers was mentioned. So are we asking members of the community to volunteer to do this, or are any of them paid employees? But I'd like to know a bit more about the marshals, because obviously my concern is that this, obviously we're asking people to kind of abide by the signs, but what happens if drivers don't do that? So will this have any teeth? Will the marshals be around a lot? Because we'll probably need someone permanently stationed at the bottom of Brook Street, to be honest, and also outside certain schools that I know of where the parents sit there. The problem is particular, obviously, in the winter, where they'd sit there because they say they need the engine on to keep the car warm. So that's where it will be needing a degree of enforcement. So how much teeth will this have? Obviously, the other point I would just make is that this is an excellent approach, but it can only be a first step. That ultimately the traffic is the problem, and we need to reduce the amount of traffic on these congestion points. But it is an excellent first step. On the subject of planning, one of the things that has concerned me in the past is I've been sent photographs of new developments in Colchester where you've got streets with no pavements, and you literally have the road and the doors. It's completely anti-pedestrian. It's completely car dependent. So I think in terms of planning, we need to make sure that these things do not get built in that manner. People contact me about it. In terms of some of the other stuff there, I think the buses need to be targeted, but that's already been mentioned. I mean, I saw one the other day in Osborne Street, sat there, not just idling, but deliberately revving up the engine, and the black smoke was coming out. So I think, we need to contact the bus companies direct. They need to take on board disciplining their own drivers. I mean, that's not something a volunteer could necessarily do, I don't think, Given what I know about certain bus drivers, I think, you know, we need to be asking the bus companies to deal with that, and being quite proactive about that. Also, I was just basically going to ask the question: what are we going to do long term about the emissions from the Leisure World building, which is obviously a serious problem, isn't it? So, are there any plans in place to deal with any of that? You know, and also the obvious problem of the old housing stock, but Leisure World in particular. So, what plans have we got for that? Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I'll just pick up on a couple of points you've raised, only a couple. That the bus companies, I do think that's something officers, I know not all the air quality officers are here tonight, but as a committee, if we're minded to, we could definitely say that that's an angle we'd like to support the officers to go further on bus companies greening their stock. I know that we received a bid from DEFRA about 2 years ago, where we were able to retrofit about 10 buses, and then since then we got a bit more to make them much more or much less polluting. But we've still got a long way to go, especially when the buses are pretty empty and only got a few people on, partly due to COVID, but still polluting, and they're really old stock. So I'd support, I'd happily, as chair of the panel, from Mark's comments, and I've seen a few nods, unless people are dissenting against that, to support you officers, and even to write from me as chair to say about the bus companies with no idling, it's worse when they're doing it. And Leisure World, Mark, I'd just say that in the 40% reduction that we've carried out, Leisure World was a target because it is sadly such a polluter, as well as such an excellent facility for our members of the public and residents to encourage them beyond what private companies offer through their leisure facilities. But we have changed boilers, we have improved insulation, but because of what it is, it requires a lot more work, and that could be a big future project where actually we see the rebuilding of quite a bit of it. So I'm not sure what else officers can add on that one for now, but I gave you the strategic view. So thank you, Ben. If you could just pick up any of those items or pass to any officers for any of the other answers for Mark.
Yeah, just to quickly touch on the Leisure World thing briefly, I think how we operate Leisure World will have to be one of the key things we consider in the development of our carbon management plan, which will be starting soon. We've got a meeting with the Carbon Trust to kickstart that process, and how you manage large step change projects such as changes that might happen at Leisure World will be part of that. And I think I will briefly say about the volunteers as well. I might hand over to Emily. If not, I advise speaking to someone from the air quality team when they hopefully present next meeting, because they'll be a little bit more up than I am on it. My understanding is it was volunteers, so I think it was people from the community. It wasn't just officers from the council. And it was mainly just a spreading the message role. I don't think there'd be a clear, you'd have to approach someone if you didn't feel comfortable doing that about it. But it's more just, I think there's going to be quite a big launch event. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say stuff about the launch event, so I think it's just sort of supporting that essentially. But I'll let Emily come in if she wants to add anything on that at all.
Yeah, I can update on that. Basically, the overall objective of the project is for the long term to have the community take on board action around idling. So what we've been doing is through the initial community engagement, and since then is sort of gathering people who are really interested and passionate about this subject, who want to go out and sort of talk to people about why they're idling. So it's very much a volunteer approach, and part of the proposal from the marketing company that we're working with is that they'll be holding some workshops for people that want to do this, to talk about the best approach, etc., and providing them with some resources. So yes, it was all about, it's about behaviour change in education rather than penalising. We want people to understand why it's not good to idle, and so that they voluntarily switch off because they understand why it's not a good thing to do. So we're hoping through Clean Air Colchester, the local community volunteer group, that we build their capacity through the project. with more and more volunteers, and that people in a particular area choose to target their own school, and that we have people across Colchester who will target areas where we know there are idlers. They are also producing a toolkit for schools, so we will be sharing that with all the local schools so that they can share it with their children, the pupils, share it with the parents, and they'll have all the tools available to provide more publicity. So that's on that one. And then in terms of the buses, we had quite a lot of dialogue before COVID with the bus companies and discussions with them. Some of them do have no idling policies, others don't. Those discussions sort of have disappeared to a certain extent during the COVID crisis, partly because the forums haven't been meeting as they did previously, but we're nearer to the point of wanting to launch the project. We'll get back in touch with the bus operators, and certainly any help we can receive in reinforcing how important this is with the bus operators would be welcomed. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Hopefully that answers all of your questions, Mark, at that point. Thank you. I'll move to Lorcan, please. Lorcan Whitehead.
Thank you, Chair. And yeah, I mean, echo everyone's comments. It's a really good report, and the work that's been done is very impressive in a short period of time. So thank you for all of that. A couple of things I'm wondering if we could hear a little bit more about. So one was around the works that are planned for the housing stock and the retrofitting of the 100 homes, and what kinds of things are we doing there? That seems like, you know, a couple of areas where we can have a really good long-term impact. Another one was around the sustainable procurement. Again, like an area where we can presumably have quite a big impact through what we're going to do there. Another thing I was wondering about is the woodland project, is that on track to deliver as expected? I just wonder because it's 200,000 trees in total, and we've got 15,000 or so far. So the rate's got to increase quite dramatically over the next few years. So I wonder if you could give us any reassurance on that one. Yeah, I mean, obviously one of the big things that sticks out from the report is the scope 3 emissions. Again, but as we know, and we've talked about it a lot of times, it's obviously a huge, now we have the figure, a huge part of our emissions. And I guess we'll be coming back to that in the work programme, but that is going to be, I guess, a huge challenge to work out how we can chip away at that at all. Yeah, I mean, I would also kind of echo the supportive comments for maybe trying to continue some of our meetings as a council in the format that we have been. I think that it's certainly, aside from the environmental impact, I mean, as a parent, it's been quite helpful, and a full-time worker, not only around kind of childcare, but giving me a little bit of extra time that I wouldn't have with my daughter on nights where there's meetings. So that's quite nice, but also it has made me really think about how many of those journeys we make in and out of town. You know, to get all these people into one place. And I'm not sure, I think that we should get rid of it completely, but it does seem like we could have a bit of an impact there, and it might be worth doing. And the final thing I wanted to raise was around lobbying, and do we have kind of thoughts on a sort of strategy for lobbying? I think it's good that we've kind of got that in the terms of reference. But I think, you know, we as Colchester Borough Council kind of get the problem, and I think it's really good that we get the problem. And I think that maybe there's I'm not so confident that others get the problems. You know, Mark mentioned the bus companies. Central government, I think, is certainly not doing enough. Perhaps our partners at Essex County Council. So I just wonder what we might be able to do from our position to exert a bit of pressure in a sustained way going forward on some of those other bodies.
Thank you, Lorcan. I'll address the last point first. We have just agreed terms of reference with a point that almost talks about lobbying, talking about making our voice heard on this journey. Our stewardship is really important. So that could be lobbying local parish councils, as Councillor Chillingworth added. Oh no, sorry, Councillor Chapman added. But also, yes, the county council and government. can we could pick that up again at the work programme and just talk about that being an element that I think just comes alive from our terms of reference. I'll just tackle a couple of things from what I know and again go to officers. So I was talking today with Councillor Fox, the Cabinet Member for Housing, and the 100 Homes project, we did put extra funding into that to ensure that we retrofit those houses that we are purchasing for our council tenants to be improved environmentally. So that is absolutely what we are doing. We've put extra money into that and that will happen. And I talked as well about looking at our council stock, and retrofitting is one way, but also looking at redeveloping quite substantially, where we could redevelop to make better quality housing, although some council stock is pretty good quality still, to actually look at building passive house standards by rebuilding some of our council stock. And the same thing is happening with our sheltered accommodation as well. So Elfrida House, as you will know, and Councillor McCarthy will know in his ward, is being put into planning now, and that's going to be so much better environmentally in terms of its footprint going forward. And we want to continue to retrofit and refurb completely or redevelop completely our sheltered accommodation to make sure it fits. So I'd happily hear from officers if there's anything more on top of what I've said. In trees, I'm confident we will get there. And Councillor King is working really well to push that forward with officers. Nick Day, I thank him personally for the work he's done with that. So please pass that on. David Carter is on the call this evening, gave a very good presentation the other day to environmental experts about what we're doing and how we should keep up to speed on that, using public land, but also possibly private land if they come forward. So we were talking to a landowner who wanted to come forward and share with us, co-collaborate to make sure we meet the high targets we're setting. But at the same time, we have changed the project to understand comments made by experts that a monoculture of trees may actually damage biodiversity. So we've got to be absolutely clear that we're not just charging ahead with one idea because we think it's the right thing to do. It engages public, talking about tree planting, because it's clear, it's obvious, and it's wonderful to see. But we've got to do our job of making our borough better, and that is about biodiversity as well. So that may affect some of the numbers, but we're still aiming overall for that really admirable goal, but planting other things that not just trees as well. So biodiversity gain on top of the tree planting. I'll leave any other points to officers, but hopefully that helps some of the top level answers. So I see Rory's ready to speak.
Yeah, so happy to come in there. I think you've done an excellent job, actually, Chairman, of summarising. I think one of the key areas that we will look at as a panel, I think it's on the forward plan, Councillor Whitehead, is our carbon management plan. And I think key elements of that will be looking at the feasibility of the things we need to do with our stock, and equally our approach to procurement, as Ben has already touched on this evening. Absolutely increasing the energy efficiency of our stock is being already considered within our asset management plan, making the funds available to do that. So I think possibly we'll have a deep dive into that area of work because it's such a key area. In terms of woodland project, I'm pleased to say we are on track. I think as Councillor Corrie said, it is subject to kind of confidential conversations we're having now with some landowners on larger sites. You'll appreciate as time goes on, we need to identify and secure those larger sites to enable us to provide the tree cover that we have the aspirations for. But touching on again, and I think you might hear it actually in the next item around the work we're doing, and the narrative of that project has got quite broad now. And equally, I believe we may well bring a specific update on the woodland project to this panel too, so you can hear about the detail.
Thank you, Rory. Are there any other answers from officers you want to come back on? No? Okay, some of them will pick up in the work programme then. Thank you. I will move to Councillor Chapman, please. Thanks for waiting, Nigel.
I think it's fair I should wait because I was last to put my hand up, I think. The trees thing was one thing I wanted to raise, and I suspect perhaps that's been partially answered, but I think Rory said we would have some sort of presentation on that at a future meeting, because I have been very concerned about this sort of monoculture thing you did say, and you know, with my background in Dedham Vale, we don't want sort of a lot of trees that are not normally recognised being in the Dedham Vale being planted there, and I think I'd like to know how that is all going to be brought together. So I'll refrain that comment until we get that presentation, please, in due course. I think it's a very important one, as you say. Everybody thinks, oh, wonderful to plant trees, but actually you need the right trees in the right place, not just any old tree anywhere. So that is a concern for me. The procurement was the other thing I was going to mention. We are part, I think, still of a sort of procurement hub or something, aren't we, with our local authorities? Are they obviously going the same way as us in this these ideas, or I wouldn't want us to miss out on sort of a good deal just because the others wouldn't come looking at green credentials for the suppliers. So I think we need to ensure we're bringing others aboard with that, so we can continue that sort of procurement. My other really sort of thought was about cyclists coming in from the rural areas. I did mention it some briefly, I think, with David King. It is an issue. I think a lot of my villages, I know it's only a small number in the big scheme of things, but a lot of them do want to get into town. I think they have issues about, okay, it may be great when you get into town driving around, but there's issues I think that probably county council need to be addressing on the rural roads. I mean, Suffolk are now going to promote more their quiet lanes, and I think Essex are very much, as far as I'm aware, they're not pursuing that. They haven't been pursuing it in the past, but it is a very good scheme to make lanes safer for pedestrians and for cyclists. I do wonder if there's something that we ought to perhaps be pressing Essex to think about in some of our lanes in the future. And it would give some sort of security, I think, for people to get from the villages, the rural areas, onto the sort of main roads where things are better with cycleways and that sort of thing, and come into Colchester to do whatever they want to do. And I think the other thing they do raise, of course, is security of parking when they do get into the town centre with their cycles. I think I haven't heard addressed really lately, and it is again of concern to them. I think the only other thing was to talk about idling outside schools. There's a big package of stuff out there, but it's really all ought to be wrapped up together. Driving children to school sort of from a few hundred yards away, which happens, and idling outside and all this sort of thing. There ought to probably be a big piece of work on trying to educate parents on all these sort of aspects of getting their children to school. It is a massive problem, and again the villages suffer at the moment because of course a lot of children come from the town to the village schools, so we get a lot of our village schools are sort of an absolute mecca for people parking outside and catching up on their nattering and so on. So lots of issues around there, I think, that we need to try and bring together. It's always useful to do that. And my final point really is on CBC meetings and that sort of thing. You know, this is all great, but one thing, as a very old hand on this, and I'm sure this will remember, when even before meetings, we used to have teas in the town hall. We could actually talk to fellow councillors from other parties, have a very good cross-party dialogue, really, and understand what's going on. That's clearly gone completely. We did have opportunities before or after committee meetings subsequently, and if we do go to every meeting online, we ain't going to have that. And it's a great sadness, I think, that we cannot have that sort of camaraderie which has been mentioned in an ordinary. I think Peter Chillingworth said that. But for businesses and that sort of thing. But I think for councillors, that is something we desperately need to keep together, so we actually do understand we are all human, whichever side of the political spectrum we come from, and we do need to be able to meet up and talk as human beings and not just as committee members and politicians. So I think that covers the main sort of points I had to make. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Nigel. Your last point is a really important one, actually. I'm very supportive of the comments made by councillors across the meeting this evening about not having to go in and the environmental reduction of the impact on that. But I think you're right, and I blame Councillor Smith years ago for taking away those teas. It was the first year I got on the council. I used to enjoy being fed as a student at the time. And
we know who's to blame, Mark. Yeah.
I grew up as a young boy learning from you guys, but actually it was really helpful. And I think you're right, because in our sort of world of social media, we see the inhumane way in which people treat each other, and we get it as public representatives, and we shouldn't and we shouldn't do it to each other either. And it's really important, I think, that camaraderie you've talked about and others have. So we've got to look at a hybrid system and a way in which we can benefit from that in the same way we believe staff would as well. So I'll take that point back, and it's something we should take to the member development group when that next meets. There's a few things that I think, actually one of them in particular we should take as a recommendation, along with some of the recommendations we were going to take on local plan. I think your point about quiet lanes and rural communities and getting into the town. So this is something, again, I did pick up with Councillor Bentley, because coming from Wivenhoe, I wanted to make sure as safe as possible route could come in, the same for your rural communities in the north, that they're a connected, safe cycle route. And there was one example where they're looking at tranche 2 connecting wider out to the east and west, but there was a path that took you from about Priory Street on East Hill upwards, but there was not a connection between Priory Street down to where the river is, which Councillor Scaldis will know about, and it's a sort of gap in the cycle path. So there's still common sense aspects that need to be tweaked. And I think actually a recommendation that you've just put forward I'd like to make is that we take that from the panel and put into the Colchester Transport Strategy, and to Councillor Bentley about those rural connective routes, actually bringing people all the way in, because there's no point just driving into a certain point where you can then get on a safe path in Lexden and come in, for example. And also on cycle security, that's something the borough are looking into themselves, but also the county are too, because that's absolutely important. There's no point coming all the way in with your nice bike and then it not being safely parked. So those are the main points from me. On the trees point, David Carter is here if he wants to jump in, but I remember him explaining to us that absolutely we are not putting trees that are not native to an area into a new area. That's not happening at all. We are absolutely looking at what is natural to go into to create new planting in areas such as you talk about in Dedham, for example. I've said everything I need to say, so officers, who wants to come in and help with any of those answers, please?
I'll just come in on an item. I think a number of councillors have raised it this evening in terms of the idling outside schools. And I just wanted to make you aware of a project that we're delivering through the North East Essex Parking Partnership, the 3PR scheme, which is very much around working with school communities to promote safety outside schools. So it deals with wider kind of behaviour in terms of promoting physical activity, walking to schools, but equally safe parking and keeping the road clear outside. So there's a great deal of work already going on in that regard, and I think it goes hand in hand with the work that we're doing to promote physical activity, active travel, and no idling. And I know that will continue. And it's very much working with the community, with the schools, with the children, and getting them involved. So I just thought it'd be worth highlighting that, so you know it's going on.
One thing that's been missed, perhaps procurement, if we can work with other councils or whatever.
I'm absolutely up for that, Nigel. Thank you, Rory. Is there anything you can add on that, please?
Yeah, I think Ben's probably. I know Ben's looking at procurement. He's working with our own procurement colleagues at the moment in terms of the portal, the wider social value, and the environmental benefits we can gain through our new contracts and whatnot. So Ben, I don't know whether there's something specific you wanted to add to this, because I know it's a key area for your next steps work.
Yeah. So I don't know too much about procurement with other local authorities, but in terms of what we're doing, the council's working with a company called the Social Value Portal, a company that will make it easier to understand the social value that contractors the council will be working with for delivering its contracts, how much that they will deliver. Basically, there'll be measures within the contract description that goes out to contractors, and they can basically show how sort of good they are, essentially. So some of those measures will be environmental measures, so sort of identifying how many sort of electric vehicles are on that contractor's fleet. Does that contractor have some sort of climate emergency or some sort of climate action plan, environmental policy, that sort of thing? So we'll be using that process to hopefully identify greener contractors to work with and to lower the council's indirect emissions.
Thank you, and perhaps that is another recommendation. I know this paper wasn't asking for recommendations, Matthew, but hopefully you and officers have been able to capture some of these, and I do think they are recommendations to give back to portfolio holders. So that point there, I think from Councillor Chapman could go to Councillor King on resources, just to beef up the point made by Ben about social value portal work, but also just to say wider than that, not just us, but when we are, because I think Nigel would know it was Braintree and Tendring and others locally that we used to contract with, perhaps IT contracts or the like. So if we can add that as a recommendation when we're contracting procurement beyond the borough, can we get other boroughs to get to the high standards we expect on environmental matters? Okay, thank you. Councillor McCarthy, you're the last one to speak, and then I think we need to move on. We've done this a lot of justice. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you. I did have my hand up before Councillor Chapman, but I lowered it again because unfortunately the curse of being further down the list of asking questions is most of the things that you've scribbled down in notes become null and void because they've already been asked or talked about previously. But it just goes to show how important this panel is and is going to be. So I thought I would speak anyway very quickly just to pass on my thanks to Rory, Ben and the team, because we have made some excellent inroads in the first year or so, but there is obviously a very, very long way to go. My last question that was just hanging there by a thread, and I thought, yes, I can ask something, was killed off when Councillor Whitehead was talking about the Woodland project. But he makes a good point, because obviously last year and this year in total it'll be about 15,000 trees that we've planted. However, each year we dish out 10,000 trees on the annual Trees for Years project, or whatever you want to call it. Do those figures accumulate into the total? Because essentially last year and the next 4 years, that's 50,000 more trees. So yes, essentially, do they come under the total or accumulate into that 200,000?
Good point. Thank you, Sam. Rory's nodding, so I think the answer is yes.
Yes, they do. They do.
Thanks.
Excellent. It makes sense. Thank you, Councillor McCarthy, and apologies for you being down the end of the list there. Thank you all for the input and enthusiasm. I think the enthusiasm comes from our officers doing such a great job. And I thank you, Ben, and thank you to all the officers on the call who are supportive and behind the projects, and there's many others as well. So thank you, and we've got more work to do. So it's great to see what we've done so far and how we can build on that. So overall, we're to note this report, but we have taken from contributions from councillors some recommendations that Matthew, hopefully we've collated those and we can put them to portfolio holders. There is a couple to Councillor Young on local plan and planning issues, perhaps to Councillor Lilly on planning as well, but also then to take forward to our county council counterparts on the transport strategy from Councillor Chapman, and anything else I missed. I think the bus company letter as well, if possible. So hopefully we've collated all of that and we can nod on the screen to say that we're noting that report. Is everybody happy with that? Thank you. I have no other indications, so I assume we're all happy to note. Thank you. Matthew, unless there's anything else, I will move on. Okay, thank you. Thank you all for that discussion. So Rosa, up to you to tell us about the Colchester greening policy. Sorry, we've left you with perhaps less time, but I'm sure you can be brief and still give a dynamic overview. Thank you.
Sure, no problem. So I will keep this brief. Back in November 2019, the council committed to the end of the use of glyphosate weed killer, and that followed a recommendation from the Environment Sustainability Task and Finish Group. That commitment focused specifically on the phased reduction of the use of glyphosate on the council's own land with its partner organisations, and setting out really a very clear message of a role model within Colchester of how we can apply that, and then further work with other organisations beyond the council to demonstrate how we can reduce the use of the glyphosate weed killer. Since that commitment in November, officers have been working in depth, testing out, trialling and looking at different ways, and have already started to reduce the use of that weed killer. And by March 2021, the use of glyphosate in our general use will have been phased out. Removing the use of glyphosate is not straightforward. It's not a matter of a like-for-like replacement. and officers have been carefully working, looking at a variety of different methods that can be applied to the varying different locations that we apply that weed killer. And that's set out within the report that we've provided and the policy that's been brought together. Nevertheless, there are going to be, and there will continue to be in the current time, areas where it will be necessary to use a combination approach of the chemicals in areas where such locations as invasive weeds, but that's in the current situation. We are developing a policy that's going to be reflective of the changing methods that can come about as not only this council, but other councils and other organisations look to reduce glyphosate. In developing the policy and the proposals that we've put together, we've been incorporating methods to support not only the reduction and removal of glyphosate, but also how we can continue to support biodiversity. And you've heard already in this evening's meeting how we're applying that through the Woodland project, but also tying in this policy as well. So we're looking at areas around the borough where we can either stop or reduce grass cutting, and also looking at areas where we will look at naturalising. So where we will not continue to heavily maintain those areas, but allow them to rewild. And that continues to support this approach of reducing the use of glyphosate. As I said, there are many other organisations and councils across the whole of the UK that are taking this positive step, and our officers will continue to observe, learn and develop approaches around the management of weeds, and to continue to support the council's commitment and its aims to conserve and enhance biodiversity, whilst ensuring that our practices are safe for our staff and also for the people of Colchester. There's lots of detail within that report, but with me tonight are the officers that are managing and developing this policy, who can support me with any questions that you've got. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosa. It's actually quite a detailed paper. It does go into further work. We're trying to reduce completely the use of glyphosate to the point where it's only perhaps being injected into Japanese knotweed at this point, but I know there's a few other examples of where it's being used. But if we can eventually end its use, that's my aim. That's something we declared as a task and finish group, and Cabinet did agree to. So thank you for your work on that so far. We're almost there, and I know that better alternatives are being sought, as you say. And also to look at the effects on biodiversity. That is the point as well as protecting the safety of our youngsters and our families when they're using play parks. And I'm glad that that's where we began ending its use. Let me just have a look at speakers. So I've got Councillor Chinningworth, Councillor Gocher and Councillor Scaldis. So Peter, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, I think it's extremely important to take advantage of the policy of reducing the use of glyphosate for biodiversity and leaving well alone certain areas. I think this is great, but I think it might have repercussions with some of our residents who are used to manicured grassed areas. I think we've got to have a publicity, an explanation available for people near these areas so that they understand why we're doing it. I think there's a national move in that direction, but of course, not everybody understands this, and that if you are affected by your local play area or what is used as a play area suddenly becoming rewilded, it might make people cough a bit. So I think we must be ready to explain things to them. That's all. Thank you.
I absolutely agree, and we did discuss signage before, didn't we, Rosa? Rosa, is it best to come to you for that answer, please?
Yeah, absolutely, and I completely understand and support the view on that. In terms of this policy and our new approaches of allowing weeds or plants or trees in a natural way, it does go against our traditional approach, and the perception element is really important for people to understand the reasons why we're doing that. So to underpin that work, it's really important that we do really comprehensive engagement and communications and campaigns. Some of the things that we've been looking at is how we can engage schools that might support then the creation of signage that can be going into those locations. We're looking at other creative and innovative ways around engagement activities using quite creative ways. And obviously we'll be using our social media and other mechanisms. And obviously as hopefully we move into less restrictions around social distancing, we'll want to do a lot more around community and engagement, face-to-face activities as well in those local areas. And we'll be making sure that we connect and keep our community areas updated where we're applying those approaches. So through the parish councils with the ward councillors, but also the community advocates through our community engagement team as well. So there'll be a whole host and variety of different ways that will be communicating and engaging the public in what we're trying to achieve, and setting really clearly what our objectives are in our approach.
Thank you, Rosa. That's a really helpful answer. That comprehensive approach of every method we possibly can will be great. I'll just say one thing, that when we do put some little signage stakes in the ground, which I think is an effective way, we make sure they're not sort of the Corex plastic. We make sure that they're environmentally friendly as well. Yes, they might biodegrade over a year, but that's kind of the length we need them for. So yeah, everything we do needs to be done in the right way. So just a reminder of that. I'm sure you were going to do that anyway. So thank you. Councillor Scoulis, I think, is next. Yes, Lee, please.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, no, this is really welcome, both of these, getting rid of the glyphosates. I think Councillor Gocher raised that early on. I think it was before he was a councillor, so that was really positive that we've gone with that. And the grass cutting, it does show that this council does mean business. And I think it's surprising that we've actually doing this already. I didn't realise, because considering the year we've had, where we've had substantial growth in weeds and plants, I haven't noticed any weeds in our parks. So that's really impressive. So it shows what we're doing is working and can be done. And let's hope Essex County Council follow that where possible. The other one, I think you kind of hinted at it, Rosa, actually, but to kind of solve Peter's concerns, would it not make sense to consult councillors about areas in their areas where it would make sense not to cut the grass or to rewild? And we have connections through our communities where we can communicate that. So obviously Peter has parish councils who communicate that through their magazine. We can do it through social media. We have a parish magazine in Old Heath. There's ways around it to promote this and get people to understand, because there will be the odd 2 people who kick off. But I think most people do seem in favour of this, and it saves us money as well. But there's areas I can think of in my ward and other people's wards where it would be appropriate, and it would be quite welcome.
Thank you, Lee. I know we are trying to do that, but we've already got loads on our plate, but we want to do more, don't we? So Rosa, over to you.
Yeah, sure. Within the policy document, it does show the areas that we're looking at already, and my officers will be speaking to the ward councillors, because we know that they have the connections as well as our own officers. So yeah, we'll be making sure that happens too.
Thank you, Lee. Councillor Gocher, please, Mark.
Yes, I'd obviously just like to thank everyone, all the officers who've been involved in this. It's an excellent thing to have done, and I think it's an excellent step in the right direction. One thing I was just going to ask is, are we going to share the information about how we've done this? Once glyphosate has been virtually phased out by March 2021, are we going to share the information with our neighbouring councils? Because certainly there have been reports in the local press recently of concerns about glyphosate spraying in neighbouring boroughs. So it's about sharing good practice. I think that's quite important. I totally agree with the idea of signage to change people's perception. We do have this kind of modern perception of kind of overgrown areas as being untidy. I mean, especially if it's near anything to do with children's playgrounds. I mean, it's a wonderful opportunity to show the actual things that they can see in the wildlife, the wildflowers, the wonderful grasshoppers, the other insects and flora and fauna that they won't see on a kind of piece of sprayed ground, dead because of glyphosate. So it's a wonderful way of actually engaging children's interest in wildlife as well. You know, some relatively straightforward little signs.
Thank you, Mark. Absolutely agree there. I was going to make one point about sharing with others, because we've once again ratified that in our terms of reference, and I think officers are excellent at doing the job, and sometimes we need to actually shout about the excellent job we're doing. So it is our duty to spread or stop the spread of glyphosates anyway, and to communicate with other councils on that. And I know parish councils are very much on board, at least in my area and a few others I know of. Rosa, over to you just to add to that, please.
Sure. I will pass to David because he has greater connections with his colleagues across other councils. But yes, this is we know from talking to other councils that they're all starting to explore this already. And we are talking to other councils that have it well established and those that are just starting out and kind of sharing that journey. So I'll hand over to David because he has got, he's the one with the connections. So I'll pass over to David.
Thank you, Rosa. Yes, as Rosa said, we have other connections. Colchester also sits on Parks East, which is the Eastern Region Parks Forum, which is neighbouring authorities throughout Essex and Hertfordshire. A lot of the same authorities are carrying out the same projects, from either removing glyphosate to rewilding to tree planting. So we're sharing information and learning as we go. But again, as we get down to the end of March 2021, and if we've basically removed nearly all of our glyphosate use, we will be basically sharing that with the Parks Forum as well. And hopefully some of those authorities will be able to learn or use some of the methods we've picked up as we go along. The phasing is over. Originally it was going to be from April this year to March next year. And that allows us to actually identify the best ways to control this unwanted vegetation through either just something as simple as bark mulch to, there are some non-glyphosate weed killers out there which we would probably use to a minimum as well. We've tried hot foam. It could be just down to increased trimming regimes to manual weeding. And also potentially what we'd like to do is get the community engagement as well. And that's one area which we're definitely looking at around our beach huts, where we've stopped spraying on West Mersey as well.
Thank you, and thank you, David. And Mark's point about with letting weeds grow and the rewilding, it is an education point. As educators ourselves, we like to see that happening. So I think that's a real positive. So some of the signs hopefully could talk about dandelions, grasshoppers, and clover, and whatever else will be growing around those areas. Thank you. Councillor Whitehead, please, Lorcan.
Thanks, Mark. And yeah, thanks again. This is really welcome, and it's very good reading the report and looking at all the various methods that are outlined there to help to avoid having to use these things. I mean, my personal view is that we should be as ambitious as possible when it comes to the rewilding, and leave as much as we can. And I agree. I mean, I think Peter and others really hit the nail on the head with the fact that we're going to have to do some public relations around this stuff. I say point 9, item 9.1 in the report says that we may/will have to do some publicity. I think we can probably delete the may. We definitely will have to do some publicity. There's another point in the report which talks about maintaining the ground maintenance expectations of some of the customers of CBH and Fora. And I think maybe our role might not be to maintain those expectations. It might be actually that we need to change some people's expectations about how the grounds might be maintained and what's acceptable and what's preferable. But yes, so I think, you know, some work to do there, but good to see the plans. One question I wanted to raise was around the use of glyphosate. So it has been used. Has it been used by our own operators? And obviously there are worries around the health impact. And have we done anything to alert those people who've been doing the work with the substance towards those potential health impacts, encourage them to towards information that they may need to be aware of, to look into. So that was one thing. And another thing was, I apologize because this isn't technically related to the report, but something that's occurred to me. I wonder, what has our position on replacing street trees changed now? Is that something we are now able to do?
Thank you. I think that's partly county as well, but hopefully officers can help. I'll just take the 2 points on wording and see if the committee are happy with that. I would definitely say, yeah, delete may and say we need publicity. I think everyone's said that on the committee so far, so please take that forward, officers. And I completely agree with the maintain point. We don't need to get people to maintain their attitudes about how they must have their flower beds looking a certain way. I think it is absolutely right to change behaviour. Councillor Whitehead, so I agree. So again, if we could, I did see David nod, and officers I think would be supportive of that. We're giving that clear direction. Unless anyone dissents from that, I would say I agree with both the language points that Councillor Whitehead has just made to take forward when we agree this report. Answers to the other questions, please.
Yeah, again, so I'll pass to David in a moment. In terms of the management, the health implications element. So my understanding, and David will correct me if I'm wrong, the application of weed killer is undertaken by our contractor. So they will have, as part of that contract, all of the health and safety, risk assessments, training and awareness, etc. And we've been working really closely with them in terms of developing this policy, because it obviously directly affects the work that they're undertaking for us. But David will come in with any other additional comments or notes on that. In terms of street trees, that's something that we are looking at under the Woodlands project, and I think it's been mentioned already that we might come back with a presentation specifically on the Woodland project and the approach that we've taken over the last year into year 2. It's something that we are talking to Essex County Council with, because obviously it would be on the highway. So there's some conversations happening with that at the moment. David, is there anything else that you want to add to that?
Yeah, I can just confirm, obviously ID Verdi have their own risk assessments, health safety policies to the use of glyphosate, and also that glyphosate is still licensed to use, which I think is to about 2023. And I think from the, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's the European Commission that it is safe to use as long as you use the proper safe PPE and have the safe, basically the safe training to use it. So there has been some, I think, cases in the United States against about the health issues of using glyphosate, but I think they were inconclusive.
Thank you. I hope we've covered all the points there that were brought up by Councillor Whitehead. Thank you. And the last comments from Councillor Chapman, please, Nigel.
Slightly tangential, I think. It's just looking at recommendation 2.2. I don't know whether there's any thoughts of having a go at the county council not to mow their verges in the rural areas. I know some of my parish councils have been trying to do that for years. I think one of the problems is that county councils don't know who actually do mow their verges in certain areas, frankly. It gets subcontracted to subcontractors. But I think that's, again, is an important thing if we can get them to leave some verges. The wildlife that these verges encourages is amazing, and they just massacre them regularly. So I don't know whether it can be part of this or whether we need to bring it in somewhere else, but just a thought as I saw it on the recommendations.
Thank you. Again, I can answer that because in the five-a-side meetings we had with Councillor Bentley and his county council officers, I have brought this up because of a lot of the rewilding and mowing. Well, a lot of the mowing that we do, we're contracted to do on highways verges. And verges can mean literally a strip of land by the highway, or it can be quite a bigger piece of land. So we have got the principal agreement from the county council to look at some of their verges that they own. And I know some of those, I'm sure that David could tell us about, are already county council ones. But in principle, I said to Kevin that we would like to rewild. And the only real point we have to get over is visibility, and doing it in a way that is not unsafe. So if weeds and grasses get too high, that will be a problem. So we'd have to do it at a certain distance and in a certain way. But otherwise, they gave us the permission in principle. So we're working on aspects of that, taking this project further. If, again, I'm sorry, officers, giving you even more work to do. But I just wonder if, from an officer level, if you want to pick that up, that connection there. But Nigel, I reassure you that's something I have picked up with the highways because so much of the land is theirs. David, did you want to add any more on that, or Rosa?
Yes, I could just add that again about when you mentioned visibility. The policy sets out that each verge which is left to rewild will be assessed for its suitability to make sure it doesn't impact on any health and safety. And also it's making sure that these verges are monitored over a period of time to make sure they are benefiting the biodiversity and the environment of what we want as well.
Thank you. And there's a point about the more rural areas as well. It's not just a town focus, it is out to where we all live across the borough. So let's make sure we do pick up on that as well, please. I'm sure you probably won't thank me for it, but if councillors, we feed into you as officers, I hope that will be a positive way of helping add to your list of things to do. Sorry about that. Thank you. Well, thank you to David and Rosa in particular. I think we've covered that paper in full. So if we can move to the recommendations, bearing in mind we did talk about there's 2 points that we could change of language from the report. So I hope we all agree with those. And if we could just move to the vote, I think we've covered it well enough, please.
Thank you, Chair. So same procedures before, councillors, please. Councillor Chapman?
Agreed.
Councillor Chillingworth?
Agreed.
Councillor Corey?
Agreed.
Councillor Dundas?
Agreed.
Councillor Gocher?
Agreed.
Councillor McCarthy?
Agreed.
Councillor Scordis?
Agreed.
And Councillor Whitehead?
Agreed.
Thank you, that's unanimous.
Excellent, thank you. That's great. Good work done tonight. And we move on to the work programme now, if I'm correct. I just have to go back to the agenda. So, yeah, the work programme item 11. Matthew, can we move to you just to outline that for us, please?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Councillors, you'll no doubt be familiar with these reports. The work programme sets out a draft programme of reports to be returned to you throughout the municipal year. This is being prepared with officers who have highlighted some of the key areas that they think you would need to see. And really, we're just asking you to note the contents of the report or make any suggestions or requests or recommendations as to items you might like to see being brought back in the future. So over to you on that basis.
Thank you, Matthew. We have already discussed a few items tonight. If councillors want to remind me of those points they've made during the meeting, I'm more than happy for you to do so. So I've got Councillor Scordis and Councillor Chillingworth for now. So Lee first, please.
Thanks, Mark. First one that came to mind, I don't know if we're able to do a piece of work on this, but North Station Road, it's a conservation area. And we've got Essex County Council doing their work there on the Safer Greener work. is there any sort of work we could do there? I mean, former councillor Darius Laws always sends me pictures of when it had trees down there, which he'd love to see, and it would be great. But we have to remember this is an area where people enter the town from the station. It's not always the most attractive, that first bit, till you get to the Victoria. So I don't know whether that's possibly something this panel could look at. And I say it's an entrance in and out for sustainable transport as well.
Thank you, Lee. I could turn that point into a more strategic one in a second, but I'll answer the question. I have actually talked about this publicly already. It is something we are going to do. We are in the process of measuring up tree. They couldn't be. We had issues with highways, whether we could put them into the ground or whether we do potted planting of medium-sized trees. So that's something that is currently being worked on through the Fixing the Link project and as an extra. So both Councillor Goss and Councillor King have been working on that. So actually, I think if we could take that away as asking for an update on that, that will be really useful. If I could ask officers to make that note again, a recommendation to the portfolio holders for an update on the Fixing the Link and the planted trees. Trying to think of a word, the potted planted trees, and how that has progressed. But Lee, if I take your point a bit more strategically, it's about greening the entrances to the borough, greening the borough, which is part of, does fit into the rest of the policies we have, tree planting, but also doing it in a way that we're talking about roundabouts we're looking at as well, again, in a safe way. So there's a number of different projects that we're bringing together. I wonder, Rosa, whether you're best placed to answer this question, or whether you think it will be contained in some of the work we're already doing or coming back to, or whether we could add it on at all. Or if not, Rosa, who else?
Yeah, I think we can include that going forward. Yeah, that's not a problem. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I do, as I say, think it fits with some of what we're doing, but actually to go further, I think there's areas where we need to focus on hotspot areas that could look better, that benefit then from the greening aspect, with also with air quality as well. Thank you, Lee. Councillor Chinningworth, please, Peter.
Thank you, Mark. Engagement. We, as the Task and Finish group, had meetings with some outside organisations. And if you recall, about 2 months ago, Extinction Rebellion approached us with comments on our plan. And we said at that time that we would arrange a meeting with them. I don't know whether that's taken place because I haven't been involved, but I think we ought to at least have one session where we invite other organisations to talk to us. Extinction Rebellion have rather blotted their copybook as far as I'm concerned, because although I agree with their principles, I don't like some of their methods, and I think it's counterproductive. But at the same time, I think we ought to engage with them. Thanks.
Sorry, I don't know if I lost connection or if you did, Peter. Did you finish your point? Okay, thank you. I must have lost connection. I heard you saying about Extinction Rebellion and meeting with them. And that's I completely agree about the wider point there about engagement with organisations and groups. We need to do that, and we can either invite them as a panel to sort of come and discuss with us. I think we need to work out a way in which we can do that best. Whether we do that in public or whether we have sort of forums where we meet with them. I'm just trying to look back at the agenda and see when it's most apt to have people come and speak, and via what process we do that. I'll think about that as I take other comments and see how we can do it best. And also I'll ask officers to come back on that one. Whilst we have a think on that one, I'll go to Luke and Whitehead, please. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, I would absolutely, second Peter's suggestion there. I think Extinction Rebellion submitted a really comprehensive response to the parking consultation. I think, it'd be useful to have engagement from them and others. But yeah, just to remind you, the one that I raised was around lobbying, and whether we can have a think about how we can use the position of the council, maybe to do that effectively. Just to illustrate the point, I mean, I read a very alarming report this morning, which said that they talking about a report by the MOD, which is suggesting that we should not take serious measures, and we should aim for 3.5 degrees of warming by the end of the century, and it would be preferable to do that than to impact GDP now. So I think it's really important. Those of us who have a voice, as the council does, I think it's really important that we make our voice heard. And that we're a positive influence, because Lord knows there's enough bad influences out there. So yeah, that would be my suggestion.
Thank you, Lorcan. I'm just trying to think again how we play that in. If you are the spokesperson for your Labour group, and I probably will be the Lib Dem representative, if we have discussions as spokespersons about what reports come forward, and then we could put them onto the agenda and say, right, we want to talk about this latest report, how it affects our borough, but how we could lobby those who have the powers to make changes, whether we have some powers ourselves or whether, and one of those things is the white paper for planning that we've talked about this evening already, which we are already responding to, but we will feed in based on some of the comments made earlier to the portfolio holder. So I think perhaps we take it to our spokespersons meetings, that we've got it written in our terms of reference that we will have a voice, that we will speak to our borough and beyond. And I think actually we take report by report, if we share them at those spokespersons meetings, if it's, for example, that MOD report, let's put it on the agenda and get a view of the committee, and we can put that back to Cabinet as well. So I think it's probably the best way to deal with that point. Thank you. Going back to Councillor Chillingworth's point, Rory, I think you're happy to come in. I think, and Councillor Whitehead supported it. We do want to engage. We do want to engage with groups who may have some good ideas about community aspects of projects, etc., or other expertise. I've met with Councillor King, with representatives of the Natural History Society and other ecological experts. We've got to bring them in. We don't know best all the time, and it is about getting that experience. So, Rory, if you've got some answers about how we can do that, that would be helpful. Thank you.
So obviously happy to take a steer from you, Chair, and the panel. I think we'd earmarked community engagement as one of the early items to discuss at a future meeting. Those of you who've been involved in the Task and Finish group previously will recall we did take a paper previously on methods for engagement, and I think a key element of that paper was looking at how we very much engage with activists and ecological groups, but also the wider population, because I think recognising that if we're going to achieve the change we need to achieve, and I think it's been touched on before, certainly in conversations I've had with Councillor Goethe before, that we need to impact on the population at large. So I think perhaps there's something about how we do that. I think you've touched on it already, Chairman. I think the conversations you've been having with officers and other councillors with groups separately were really successful. I understand the meeting with the Colchester Natural History Society recently was very positive. I think the way the Woodland Project has evolved is testament to that engagement with groups, because I think they've had an opportunity to really feed into that. So I think I'm just mindful of, we've got quite a lot of things we probably need to bring to this panel. I think we probably need to dedicate time to speak to groups individually. I just wonder whether we look to form a subgroup or give away an opportunity where we can speak with them separately. And of course, they will have access through this public meeting to have your say and to hear the work of the panel and the council too. So I just wonder whether there's a few things in there. How do we engage with the wider population, and is there something specifically we need to do there? I think we should possibly look at having separate time and meetings with key groups. And of course, they will have the opportunity to feed into all of these meetings going forward and all of the papers that get brought forward, which is really positive.
Thank you, Rory. So I take your points. I think they're very helpful. Thank you. I think first of all, we've got in October on the agenda, the first item, sustainability and community engagement. So at that point, we can talk about how we work on that wider community engagement, number one. And then number two, I think you're right that we could have a subgroup which has at least a representative of us all politically in officers that could meet with other groups coming forward. And also, I think we could have feeding in from other groups where we do meet them either in public or just in a private forum where we get ideas out and do some brainstorming, a bit like we've had the workshops with the Carbon Trust. So we could have workshops with other groups out there in the community like Eco Colchester and Extinction Rebellion, etc. So I think that sort of three-pronged attack would work pretty well. And I know that with Councillor King and I, we talked about having an advisory group with the natural history and other ecologists locally, and that could form part of that subgroup that we talk about. Okay, thank you. I see Councillor Chinningworth with his hand up again, so hopefully you can feedback on what you think of those suggestions, Peter.
Yes, I absolutely agree. I think a subgroup is probably the best way, because I know how busy the diary is for meetings, and some of us can do this sort of thing out of the normal council sequence. I wanted to take up a point Lorcan raised on lobbying. I've been very concerned about the lack of movement on building regulations. And I work with Jill Bruce, who's the WI Ambassador for Climate Change. And we've been lobbying Bernard Jenkin on this. He is positively interested in this subject, and he's now agreed that we can meet him and the Housing Minister to discuss this. I'm all for this. I hope I'm not going beyond the remit of a member of this group if I carry on with this sort of work outside in my own time. I hope I have your support anyway.
Thank you, Peter. I think that's one of the biggest areas we need to lobby on is building regulations, because we can talk about planning, but when it comes to building regulations, that is where we actually drive the innovation, the evolution that needs to happen on the greening of our housing, which at the moment is pitiful and not good enough. So that's fantastic you're doing that. I think it would be useful if a subgroup of councillors could join you on that, especially if meeting with the Housing Minister. So number one, I'll give support to that. Absolutely recommend doing that. I'm happy to join you. I did anger Sir Bernard the other day talking about breaking the law on the EU, but apart from that, we've got a good relationship. So if I'm welcoming your work on that, thank you. But if you're happy, we could look at a delegation from this committee joining you.
I'll see what I can do, thank you.
Thank you, excellent. Okay, let me check. I don't think I've got any other hands up. So hopefully we're happy otherwise with our work programme, and we can always evolve it as we go along with those spokespersons meeting together. As I said, on lobbying and Lorcan, we've already got an aspect to lobby on. I think that is one of our biggest points, building regulations. So thank you again, Peter. Okay, I can't see any other hands up and any other indications, so it must mean you want to go and enjoy the rest of your evening. So can we agree the work programme with some of those small tweaks added going forward, please? Over to you, Matthew.
Joe, if you're happy to take this on assent, I can do a name vote if you want.
Oh, okay, I think yes, it would take it on assent as a consensual basis. If everyone is happy, we will carry on with that work programme, and it can change as we go forward. So thank you for all the nods and thumbs up. That does get us to the end of the agenda, unless I'm wrong. So thank you all, and we can officially close the meeting. Thanks for the first meeting of the Environment Panel. We are good, up and running and going. So thank you, officers, for your time and your efforts so far. Thank you, councillors, I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Good
Thank
night.
you. Good night.
No,
Thanks, everyone. That was interesting.
Thank you.